Sins of a Solar Empire 2 has released on Steam after a nearly 2-year incubation period on the Epic Games Store. And while it technically released into version 1.0 a couple of months back, as IGN gleefully pointed out, it's clear that the proper tentpole release is this one, with its final 2 factions and all the promised features. And I'm glad to say, Sins 2 delivers on almost every front. It takes massive strides in accessibility and quality of life, making the game much easier to engage with for players of all skill levels. It significantly develops the 3 races and 6 factions mechanically, and it leads into their asymmetry more than ever, making the lack of any new ones less of a problem than you might think. Although I do think it is a bit of a missed opportunity, as having no new faction or even significant content shake-up to the existing ones feels a little bad, considering how long it's been between this and Sins Rebellion. But that's not the full story, and the more I play Sins 2, the more that complaint feels unnecessary, because there are many and more mechanical and system updates that make it the sequel we deserve. And just because there's no new faction now, it doesn't mean that there won't be one in the near future. More on that one later. I've been playing Sins of a Solar Empire for over half my life. This is footage from me playing it back in like 2010. So it's fair to say that I've been waiting for Sins 2 for a while. I was over the moon to see it announced back in 2022, and playing the early access releases during that time got me pretty optimistic. That might sound like I'm biased and would give Sins 2 a positive review no matter what, but it's actually the opposite. I've had a lot of time to stew on this game, and any sort of honeymoon phase is well and truly over at this point. So I reckon this puts me in a great spot to review the game objectively. And review it I will, so strap in, grab a snack, and let's do it. Sins 2 is an RTS/4X hybrid game that lets you grow your spacefaring empire from a single planet to lead fleets of hundreds of warships across the solar system to wipe out your foes. It features 3 races and 6 playable factions. The TEC, or Trader Emergency Coalition, are the human faction. They've been desperately trying to hold back the 2 alien races for years, and have transformed from a hodgepodge alliance of cargo runners and corporate businessmen into a proper coordinated fighting force representing the interests of humanity. During the time of Sins Rebellion, the TEC split into 2 clear groups: the Enclave, who aim to dig in and focus on a defensive strategy, and the Primacy, who take the phrase "the best defense is a good offense" to the extreme, and would also put Ashley Williams to shame as the galaxy's most intense space racists. There's the Advent, an exiled race of humans who returned after 1,000 years with a shipload of pent-up aggression and an equally large amount of specialised psionic abilities. Like the TEC, during Sins Rebellion the Advent fractured into 2 entities, with the Advent Reborn looking to steer the faction back to their true path, and the Advent Wrath going all out in hostilities, forcing any survivors to join their empire. Lastly, the only true alien race are the Vasari. Their history is some of the most interesting in the game, as they aren't the classic big bad aliens. In fact, they've been on the run from the true big bad aliens, utilising their knowledge of phase space to stay ahead and keep the dream of their once massive civilization alive. During Rebellion, they too splintered, with one group, the Alliance, accepting that diplomacy and cooperation with the other factions may be their best chance at survival, and the Exodus, who are ready to move on in their journey and consume the resources of everyone else to do it. The basic Sins 2 loop is unchanged here from the original, which is great because it's an awesome and wholly unique one in the RTS market. Nothing can quite match what Sins offers in terms of scale and mechanics while remaining true to the real-time aspect of real-time strategy. You start with a single planet and expand from there, conducting research, colonizing and developing new worlds, and building out your fleet capabilities. There is some light diplomacy in Sins, but don't get it twisted, this is not a game for coming to some grand diplomatic victory. It's about conquest, and you can only win by destroying your enemy. Sins brings a healthy mix of 4X and RTS gameplay to the table, but it leans much more into the latter side of things. Yes, the scale is large, and you'll be doing things that you may be used to doing in a 4X game, like managing planet developments and exploring large and in-depth research trees. But there are no turns to speak of, and the success of battles hinges on the micro-interactions themselves, rather than slinging big numbers at each other and watching them tick down hundreds at a time. That being said, it's rare for a Sins game to be a quick affair, and having a game be finished in under an hour is something not often seen. Sins 2 initially launched on the Epic Game Store, but now it's available on Steam too. Thankfully there is cross-play between them, and if you did buy it initially on Epic's platform, then Stardock are offering a way to redeem the game on Steam until halfway through September of this year. So if that's you, do it fast, there's a link in the description. The game doesn't include a campaign, yet, but there's a wide range of map types and sizes to play on with any sort of team arrangement, with up to 10 players of humans or AI. It also includes a bunch of tutorials to bring new or returning players up to speed. Sins 2 is in a fantastic spot technically. I haven't encountered a single crash or bug of any sort during my playtime, which is very impressive. Same goes for the widely feared mini dumps of Sins 1, where games would crash and corrupt the save for any future play, where the same mini dump error would reappear soon after loading. And despite not running into any of these previous issues, I am glad to see there are now added options to rejoin multiplayer games that you may have dropped from, or have the AI or another player be able to take over, just in case. Sins 2 is built on a brand new multi-core enabled engine that allows it to scale very well on a wide range of hardware. One of the biggest issues with Sins 1 was how it began to chug when lots started to happen, mainly because its engine was just, well, old, and not built to leverage big multi-core processors. So it's super nice to have the sequel run fantastically on a wide variety of systems, and I do mean wide. You could probably guess that based on the system requirements, and as you'd expect from the PC that I play on, it runs really well, except when you zoom into massive battles, where the frame rate does tend to chug, but you do have to get in there. I also ran this on my laptop and was pleasantly surprised, but not as much as when I ran it on this piece of ancient hardware, where the game not only booted, but ran. It didn't run well, but the fact that it ran at all blew me away, and it speaks to how scalable this new engine actually is. I do wish there were more graphical options in the settings to tailor the visuals, but considering how well it runs on seemingly anything besides the toaster in your kitchen, I'm not too fussed about it. Sins 2's art style is immediately familiar to anyone out there who's played the original, while also being fresh and modernised. The UI is cleaner, models and textures are much higher quality, and the effects are shinier. The quality of it is all very high too. Ship models stand out especially as the high points for me. The Advent in particular have some incredible looking vessels, and I love how each faction is very distinct from each other. And I know some people weren't a fan of the amount of colour on the ships in the sequel here, so there is an option to tone them down if you wish. Overall, I think my favourite faction design has to go to the TEC. While the Advent have some lovely ships and the Vasari some lovely other things, I can't go past the TEC's brutalist designs that clearly call back to their origins as humble space traders. They very much function over form. Something that constantly impresses me in Sins 2 is the scale, which isn't anything new if you've played the original, but it speaks to the impact of it that it still catches my eye. Being able to zoom in from a view of an entire solar system to individual fighters attacking other ships in battle is one of the most visually striking elements of Sins, and combining that with the visual and effects uplift makes Sins 2 one of the best looking RTS games that I've maybe ever played. Like, it is seriously hard to look away sometimes. Battles feel alive with all the particle effects flying around, and once things start to get hectic, it is a true spectacle. It's complemented by the soundtrack and the audioscape. The music is all new and fits the same vibes as the original, as do the vast array of sound effects. They do a lot to bring these battles to life, and the addition of new voice lines for ships losing shields, or being destroyed, helps to give a sense that you are not just throwing toys around here, but actual vessels with thousands of people inside them. If that makes you feel any better. One thing I don't love here though is how Sins 2 uses a lot of AI art, mostly in the research tree and character selection. Oh boy, I've thought a lot about this one. Initially, I really didn't like this. A lot of this stuff is really obviously AI generated with that particular sheen that you just tend to see, and because it's used so prominently, it is very in your face. But like I said, I've thought about this a lot, and I'll admit that I'm less sour on it now than I was when I first saw it. I think if Sims 2 was made by some massive company with hundreds of staff, I would be much less favourable. But this is not a game made by a huge team, and using these methods were likely a way to try and achieve a higher level of production value on a limited budget with limited staffing. I don't like where this leads in terms of the industry, but in this particular instance, I don't think it's the worst thing ever. Especially considering Stardock have said that the art in the game was only trained on work created by the artists themselves, and that it wasn't creating complete final designs on its own, instead more being used as a development and iteration tool. Sure, I guess they could be lying about that, but hey, I don't think they are. I'm certainly not a proponent of AI art, in fact I despise it, but its use in Sims 2 has given me a lot of food for thought, and I'm sure my opinions on this will form more and more as more games implement methods like it, whether we like it or not. The start of a game of Sims has always been the same, with a single planet and a couple of scout ships under your control, but the flow has changed quite a bit with the sequel, while retaining the core elements that make it Sims. As is tradition, your first capital ship is free, so the usual starting steps involve bringing one online, constructing a few support vessels, and expanding out to nearby asteroids and planets to begin the growth of your burgeoning empire. Each uncolonised planet is guarded by a fleet of AI vessels, the number of which depends on how valuable the planet is. Your first couple of asteroids won't be any trouble to your fancy new capital ship, but as you reach out further to the riches of Sims 2's many different planet types, more and more ships will be required to neutralise many forces in its gravity well. Similar to classic RTSs like Warcraft 3, these creeps, if we can call them that, both inhibit the speed of your expansion as well as provide crucial early game experience to start leveling up your capitals and prepare them for fighting the real enemy, whoever's on the other side of the map. As your empire begins to grow, you'll be managing more and more things. More capital ships, more planets, larger economies, and Sims 2 takes massive strides into streamlining a lot of this busy work that you used to have to do in the original game. The UI has seen massive upgrades, and it's hugely improved for players of all skill levels, as it both makes it easier to understand and saves time. Planet and ship management windows, for example, are a great way to get a quick overview of all your ships and planets, while also allowing you to quickly develop any aspect of them without having to physically jump around the map, find them and do it all manually. Another example is how the game allows you to buy and research things that require unlocks to be able to do so. Say you want to build a certain ship that requires particular research. In the original game, you wouldn't be able to just build it. You'd have to find the research, queue it up, and then queue the vessels. But here, it'll do whatever research you need to do by itself, while tallying the prices to give you a final cost of all the required things. That's a simple one, but late game it gets even more helpful, where in a single click you can buy and sell the resources required, conduct the research, fabricate the exotic materials, and queue the item, where before you'd have to do all that yourself sequentially while waiting for each of these to complete. This system manifests in all aspects of the game, from buying a single vessel and automatically trading the resource you need to build it, to conducting a Tier 5 research project and having the game queue all the necessary ones beforehand that you hadn't done. It's a wonderful system that benefits players of all levels, whether it's your first Sims game or 50th. But by no means am I saying the game has been dumbed down or simplified for the sake of it, because there are still significant challenges in managing your empire. And a lot of those are found in the 4X elements of Sims 2, mostly in the planet and economy management and how you go about research. Each planet you capture requires capital investment to unlock its full potential. There are several different categories, all with multiple levels of upgrades, affecting things like commercial income rate, orbital structure support in the gravity well, artifact excavation, and more. And thankfully, a lot of the busy work that used to exist when capturing a new planet in Sims 1 has been removed. There, every newly colonised planet began in the black, as in it was costing you money to own. So every time you took one, you'd always invest in the logistics and max out the asteroid slots to bring it into the green, which required a certain level of upfront financial investment, every single time. Now, planets essentially start at that base level, and upgrades will simply increase its stats in that area. And alongside that, asteroids have been reimagined to be a more early to mid-game mechanic, rather than be one of the first things you do. Initial income of both metal and crystal now comes from the planet's surface, and asteroids are the icing on the cake, so to speak, requiring specific research to unlock, and each one taking one of your precious orbital slots. These are broken into two categories and facilitate all of your above-planet construction. Civilian slots are things like factories, refineries, asteroids and research buildings, and military slots are things like turrets, hangars, and repair bays. One of the biggest changes to how planet management operates in Sims 2 is its new item system, which extends to capital ships, starbases, and titans as well. Each type has their own pool of items, and they're used to amplify or add functionality to its host. It's a fantastic system that allows for lots of customization. Planetary items, for example, could be as simple as adding more health to the planet, or giving a few more orbit slots for structures, to more advanced ones, like one that automatically builds a fleet of garrison ships that protect the homeworld from attack. Items can be acquired through many different avenues, some through specific research, others through rare artifact excavation, and some through engaging with Sims 2's minor factions. How minor factions have been integrated here is really awesome. It does a lot for the game, and it adds a whole nother layer to engage with, especially in the early to mid game, where utilising their abilities can be very impactful. Depending on the map size, there will be at least 2 of these minor factions, who will occupy a planet somewhere on the map. Usually you need to physically find them before you can interact with them, but some factions have the ability to get instant communication from the start of the game, or you can spend some of your influence points to reveal them manually. Influence points are core to minor factions. You can increase your pool through research or items, and they regenerate over time. You can spend them with the factions themselves, unlocking and deploying special abilities like unique items, backup fleets, or caches of rare resources. You can also bid on auctions for resources or items, which is a fun, if risky option, as your points get spent, even if you lose. Not sure if that's how bidding actually works, but hey, that's how it works here. Minor factions also now control the trade markets for metal, crystal, and exotics, meaning you aren't able to trade these items until you've revealed the faction that runs them. And if that faction is destroyed, no one can trade that resource at all. This is quite a significant change from the original, where early game trading was crucial to maximising all of your resources to get you off on the right foot. Thankfully though, it's not too hard to do here even if you can't find them physically, as getting your first couple of influence points is very early on in every faction's research tree. One thing I love about the minor factions is that they aren't randomly generated. Each are a specific faction with certain rules, items, and behaviours, and at the start of the game, the requisite number of them are randomly selected from a pool. This means you can learn how each of them operates, and use that knowledge to your benefit in-game, adding another avenue of satisfying complexity to Sims 2. Another part of new complexity added to Sims 2 that I'm not sure I'm a fan of is the brand new planet orbits mechanic. In Sims 1, solar systems were at a standstill, frozen in time, but here, planets will orbit at varying speeds, opening and closing phase lanes and changing the dynamics of the map throughout a match. On the surface, this is a great idea, and if you're a PvP player, this mechanic is likely much more interesting. But for me, someone who likes to turtle and play what sometimes feel like unwinnable games against the AI against overwhelming odds, I, at least right now, prefer to keep things static, so I can shore up my defences, and not be concerned that my rare planets filled with research structures are going to have a surprise barrage of nukes on their doorstep. I don't want to make it seem like Ironclad didn't spend a lot of time thinking about this system, because they clearly did. There's a button to rotate orbital structures to match any new phase lanes, you can change the speed of the rotation in the settings to fit your preference, and yes, thankfully you can also switch it off. Maybe I'll come around to it, but for now, I think I'll keep it as I'm used to it. Even if you are a hardcore turtler like me though, at some point you're going to have to build up a big fleet and go strike out. Combat and fleet mechanics are inherently tied to all of the main aspects of Sims 2, that's research, economy, and planet management. It's all a great balancing act between ensuring you have the structures to allow the civilian research that grows your economy, while giving enough space to the military side of things to defend those investments. Ships of course cost money and minerals to build and upgrade, but capital ships and other high-end structures and items also now require a new resource in exotics. These are made to essentially limit the number and speed of production of these powerful assets, and in a way they replace the capital ship supply mechanic from Sims 1, where here there's now just a simple global fleet supply that applies to all ships and can be expanded through research. Exotics can be found in a number of different ways, and building up your stores in the early game is absolutely essential. The best way to do this reliably is to search for them on your planet's surface. This is fairly cheap and will give you guaranteed results. But these searches can only be done once, and it is a bit of a crapshoot to some extent, because most of the time you can't be sure of what you'll get, just that you'll get something. Each kind of capital requires a unique pairing of exotics, so sometimes you're deciding between waiting to build the ship you want, or settling for the one that you can actually deploy right now. Exotics can also be gained through some research, in derelict loot around the map, or by utilising the minor factions. This remains until around the mid-game, where you can start manufacturing them for yourself using dedicated refineries unlocked in the research tree. When it comes to fighting, Sins 2 really does step into a world of its own. It may look similar to the first game, but the sequel does a lot of work under the hood to make combat far more engaging and dynamic than its predecessor. It really is fantastic, because combat in Sins 1 was already pretty darn good. The most noticeable changes are in the upgrades to weapons themselves. It's now a lot more obvious what each ship comes equipped with, both at a text and visual level, and how these weapon types act and interact in combat against things like shields, armor, and different ship types. It's a much more energetic system now. Missiles are physical objects that can be shot down by point defense guns, making tactics like fighter screening your capital a viable strategy with obvious results. Small, fast ships can outturn the tracking speed of certain other ships and their guns, making them much more effective against them in combat. Pierce and DPS stats are an easy way to understand how ships will go up against other types. And finally, capitals and titans receive that same item slot that planets do, which means there is much more customization and micromanaging available to exploit if you want to. And they pair well with the abilities that remain from the first game. I also love how some of these items and upgrades change the ship visually. That's a great touch. I love how Sins 2 offers this complexity to those who want it, but doesn't force it on you if you don't. Like, yeah, you can micro every capital ship by upgrading and equipping them to an exact spec, utilising their abilities at the right time during combat, and manoeuvring their firing arcs to be just right. But you can also just not do that. You can set their abilities to upgrade and fire on their own, use passive items rather than active ones, and simply command your blob to attack the enemy if you really want to. And Sins 2 continues its trend of massive quality of life upgrades here too, by way of the tactics window at the top right. This displays whatever ships are in the current gravity well, and you can use this to target individual stacks of enemy ships and ship types, without having to actually find and select them in the mess of whatever's going on at the time. There's also a brand new fleet selection option, where you can take your ships and add them to a pinned fleet at the top left. The fleet icon is also always present on the map for quick selection. Using this system, not only can you quickly give orders like you would a control group, but you can also construct ships directly into the fleet through a dedicated button. Doing this will automatically build the ship at the nearest possible factory, add it to the fleet, and queue it up to take whatever action the fleet is taking at the time. You can also add ships to the fleet that have already been built, and they too will fly to the fleet location, pick up whatever orders they have, and join the collective. It really is a fantastic system, and it makes fleet management massively simpler. Oh yeah, and you can also give orders to individual vessels before they're finished building. And they really did think of everything, didn't they? Overall, I love the combat and what I'll just generalise as ship stuff in Sins 2. A lot has been added here to expand the sandbox, and it does feel like there's a deep ocean of mechanics and strategies to explore, even if the factions are the same as before, and there's no massive fleet roster shakeups. That is probably my biggest gripe with the sequel. I do wish there were more ships. Like, yeah, there are some, but it's probably only half a dozen or so, and none of them are capitals or titans. Without a new faction, at least a new capital for each other faction would have been nice, or maybe just a unique one per race would have been good too. It also kind of rubs salt in the wound that we actually have fewer capital types than before, as the ones added in Rebellion aren't present here. Rip the Advent whale. And I also think an in-game codex would have been a massive boon. There is a lot of implied lore in Sins, and there's never been a campaign or story mode, so having some dedicated ship descriptions, histories, and nerdy specs to look over, maybe with some nice interactable 3D models or something, would have been fantastic. It'd also be useful to be able to explore what each faction gets without having to be in-game. Like, these previews are nice, but there's no way to tell what these items actually do before starting a match. And there is also a lot to learn about weapon types, stats, and interactions with the different types of ship defenses and such, so having a place that centralized all that information would be great for learning, without the stresses of actually having to be in a game. But yeah, I can live without that because of what Sins 2 does to improve the gameplay, even if on the surface it does seem similar to Rebellion. But I assure you, the more you play, the more you'll realise this is in fact quite a different beast. It's not immediately apparent though as you gaze upon the faction list of Sins 2, because, aside from some name changes, these are the same as what's in Rebellion. But hey, don't be fooled because these are not the same races and factions as you're used to. They resemble them, yes, and do follow the same tenets as their Rebellion counterparts, but they're much more unique than before, helping to drive home a level of faction asymmetry that Sins has sorely needed. Simply put, you can imagine each of them as a more extreme version of what existed before. The Vasari Exodus lean heavily into their ability to form a completely mobile empire, the Advent Reborn rely on their faith of the unity and heavy utilization of culture, and the TEC Primacy are more racist than ever before. And while they do all follow similar trend lines, most of the factions offer unique gameplay spins that do more than just align to a particular strategy of play, some to quite a large degree. The TEC, my personal favourite faction, are probably the most like their Rebellion counterparts. But that's not to say there's nothing new here, because there absolutely is. Each race receives a unique mechanic in Sins 2, and here for the TEC it's their trade networks. As you build trade ports and establish planetary hubs in new colonies, you can allocate points into trading any of the three resources, giving the TEC a way to deepen their economy and tailor it to what you need the most. They also receive a new Gorse frigate, which I'm a big fan of, acting a bit like the Javelin missile frigate as a direct, single-shot damage dealer, while being able to be deployed much earlier and spammed out much easier. Both the Enclave and Primacy get a selection of unique items and abilities. The Enclave go hard into defense, and they don't mess around. They're the only faction that can deploy 2 starbases in a gravity well, and their Ankylon Titan is a mobile fortress that once upgraded is supremely difficult to defeat. With those, along with strong defensive-orientated unique items and research, they're an exceptionally tough nut to crack, and my personal favourite faction. They're truly a turtler's dream. The Primacy lean hard into racism and offense, but mostly racism. They hate Xenos and they aren't shy about it. They receive a unique item in the Space Racism Beacon, which projects human-centric messages to nearby systems to boost ship effectiveness in battle. Like Rebellion, they also get the Novolith Cannon to go alongside their Titan, the former being a massive long-range gun that can shoot across the map, and the latter being a slightly shorter ranged gun that happens to have an engine and even does home deliveries. The Advent receives what is probably the most unique mechanic with Unity points. You gain these by building specific structures and you use them to unlock and level up 5 different rechargeable abilities, ranging from giving vision on another planet, making a friendly planet invulnerable for a short time, damaging and colonizing enemy planets automatically, and more. These abilities won't give a massive power advantage on their own, and need to be used in conjunction with other elements to be truly effective, but when they are devastating. Both subfactions rely on the power of the Unity and an overwhelming culture advantage to get things done, but they go about it differently. The Advent Reborn focus on increasing the strength of themselves by using planets with dominant culture to heal friendly units in the gravity well, and even revive destroyed vessels with late game research. The Advent Wrath, as their name suggests, focus on outward hostility, using the Unity to straight up flip planets to their side when a dominant culture is established, and convert enemy ships jumping into friendly gravity wells with a dominant culture. The Vasari's expertise in phase technology gives them phase resonance points. Like the Advent, you can gain and spend points by building a unique structure, and in this case you can allocate points into 3 different trees that provide bonuses to your ships when exiting phase space, such as increasing their antimatter, their damage, speed, and more at higher levels. It's a simple system that doesn't require a whole lot of input, but its lack of complexity is kind of refreshing in a game as deep as Sins. Some nice, easy to understand fleet-wide benefits to enjoy, nothing against that. But to contrast that, the Vasari sub-factions feature some of the most interesting gameplay mechanics in the entire game. Neither of them need credits at all, just relying on metal and crystal to get things done, though you can still gain funds through the odd special item or trade deal. It's a fun way to differentiate the truly alien race from the other two and makes a lot of sense lore-wise. I also love how, as the Vasari, you start a game by jumping into the solar system, whereas playing the TEC or Advent, you just have a nice colony that's already established. It's a great touch. As for the two factions themselves, first there are the Alliance, the group that wants to start to work, or at least cooperate, with the other races. And at the latter end of their research, even start to forgo their nomadic lifestyles and move on to the planets that you'd previously just used to house your indentured human servants. And now maybe you can even start to work together. They have an ability that allows instant communication with any minor factions, a massive early game boon, and can leverage their new ties with other races to boost their influence and culture. They also get a very powerful ability in All for One, which allows any Alliance player to stay in the game if any of their allies are yet to be defeated, even if the Alliance homeworld has been blown to hell. And there's a good chance that that homeworld may have been blown up by the other Vasari faction, the Exodus. These guys take a different approach to things, essentially being sick of this part of space and are ready to move on. They're more than happy to enslave the human worlds and use them for hard labour, and once they reach the endgame, strip the planet completely of resources and move on to the next, leaving a dead, floating husk. This is a very fun way to play, and thanks to the Exodus's other mechanics of using capital ships as mobile bases for command and control, construction, research, and refining, they can become a completely mobile empire with no planets at all, just an ever-travelling fleet with an endless hunger for resources, leaving a wake of destruction behind them. Pairing that mobile strategy in a multiplayer game with a heavily entrenched friend makes for games with a level of turtling that shouldn't be possible. Perfect for me, and exactly what myself and a mate did this past week. The strength of Sins 2's faction diversity is one of its best aspects, and it really makes the game stand apart from its predecessor. While yes, Sins 1 did feature some level of asymmetry, with Rebellion having even more, the sequel dials it up to 11, making each feel truly distinct without going so far as to make them unrecognisable from what people might have expected or been used to from before. The one thing it's missing, that I and many others were surely hoping for, was the long-rumoured fourth race, the ones that have been hunting down the Vasari since the very first game. And while they're not here right now, that doesn't mean they won't arrive eventually. In fact, there's no doubt that they will, thanks to the listing on the DLC roadmap included in the game's Premium Edition, and the end of the game's intro cutscene, which is extra to what's in the trailer. There's no more information besides that, but still, I'm very excited to see what they do with it, and fingers crossed it won't be too far away, maybe within the next 12 months? Here's hoping. And on that note, what is the future for Sins 2? Well, if you bought the Premium Edition, then you might know already, because like I said, there's a list of DLCs on the way and they all come with that edition. Now, we don't have any dates for these yet, but often these kinds of premium purchases are released within a year, so that might be a safe bet. So far, aside from the regular updates Sins 2 will receive, we've got the Path to Power Scenario Pack and the Reinforcement Ship Pack, both smaller DLCs that bring, well, scenarios and ships, as you could have guessed. Then there's the chunkier stuff. First, the Times of War campaign expansion. Oh boy! This promises a full single-player campaign that tells the story of the TEC, Advent, and Vasari, and I really have no idea how this will work. But hey, I love a good campaign, so I'm particularly interested in this one. And lastly, we have, drumroll please, the fourth faction. Yes, the Harbinger expansion brings, well, a new faction, that's all we know. But yeah, a new faction, a new race, how exciting. Who knows when that will be, but I can't wait. Hopefully, we're not waiting like 2 years for this. But if we are waiting that long, then maybe mods can tide us over. Those things take time too, but I know I'm not the only one anxiously waiting to hear any news on potential total conversion mods, bringing other sci-fi franchises back to Sins. The game promises to support mods better than ever before, and there have already been mods appearing in the in-game system through Mod.io, but you can also install them manually the old-fashioned way. From what Stardock have said, this engine was built from the ground up to support mods, and now that the game's out of early access, I expect them to appear at a much faster rate now. We'll have to wait and see how many do crop up and how fast, but I am hopeful. Sins 2 seems to have landed well, if the Steam reviews are anything to go by, so it bodes well for the established modding community to bring their expertise to the sequel and do their magic, to give Sins of a Solar Empire 2 a life cycle befitting its predecessor. Sins of a Solar Empire 2 is a fantastic sequel, and I dare say, the wait was worth it. Yes, I am a little disappointed that there are no new factions or significant content additions over Rebellion, like swaths of new frigates and capitals, but the gameplay upgrades, faction mechanical diversity, and presentation uplift is more than enough to make me happy. Ironclad cooked here. Sins of a Solar Empire 2 is as close to a slam dunk as I think anyone could have hoped or asked for, and I can't wait to see what they've got in the oven for the future, both in the smaller DLCs and their 2 large planned expansions. I'm still not sure how our campaign in Sins is going to work, but I'm excited to see how they can pull it off. And a brand new race after 15 years? Yes please. You can find Sins of a Solar Empire 2 on Steam and the Epic Store now, and you can get it for 20% off until August 30th. And if you like this video, feel free to support me by giving it a like or subscribing. You can even become a Patreon supporter or YouTube member, and you'll join legends like Dakayo, Bad Ghosts, Sean, Grey Spirit 4, George, King Thickums, Pavel, Bram, Christian, Dan, Orion, Dusroofkin, and Cameron. Congratulations Dusroofkin on winning the Sins 2 key giveaway in the Discord, by the way, I hope you like it. And of course to my paladins, Johnny, Marika, Age of Cause, Joe, Tank, and Empyrean. Thanks so much everyone, sorry this video took so damn long. See you in the next one, hopefully a little bit sooner.